Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all, and welcome to a wonderful presentation we're going to do with the VCCC ESG Committee. And we have some great guests. I'm Peter Hawkins. I am co-chair of the board with Dan Rosica, and I wanted to make sure that everybody feels welcome and heard, and I'm really, really pleased that we have so many people here. So I'm excited about that. So if you just bear with me for a second, I do have some little homework stuff to do, which is something we always have to do. And so this is actually the first webinar session of the new EU Deforestation Regulation Impacts and Challenges, organized by the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce in partnership with Proactiva. And we have Dulce Benke from Proactiva, who's going to be talking as well. I'm Peter Hawkins. I am co-chair of the BCCC. And I would like to thank our annual sponsors, which are Valley, Proactiva Results, thank you very much, 4B Mining, Brookfield, London Mining, BMA Law, and Mellowhawk Logistics for their support. Without them, we actually don't have a BCCC, so we're very grateful for their sponsorship. We're here today to present an overview about the new EU deforestation regulation and how it impacts the Brazilian and Canadian markets. But before we do talk about that, I do want to introduce the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce. We're an independent, not-for-profit association that has been establishing connections between Brazil and Canada for over 50 years, strengthening bilateral trade and investment relations and facilitating the exchange of experiences in both the private and public sectors. And for more information about the BCCC and our upcoming events, please follow us on social media and sign up for our newsletter via the website brascanchamber.org. Also, I do want to note that in our virtual world here in Canada, I'm in Toronto right now, we still have our feet on the land. And I'd like to acknowledge that this land where I am is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the territory of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe Chippewa peoples, home to the Métis, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And I'm always grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator and speakers for this section. I'm going to introduce Dulce Benke, who is Head Sustainability, Sustainable Finance at Proactiva, Rodrigo Pupo, Partner at MPA Trade Law, and Rodrigo C.A. Lima, Managing Partner at Agricon. And very pleased to have you all here. And so I'm going to take it away and give it to Dulce to make all the arrangements. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start thanking BCCC for the invitation to moderate this panel. It's always a pleasure for me and for Proactiva, to be here with you. And I must say that I'm very honored to be presenting one of the hottest topics in the ESG agenda today. So, as Peter said, today we're going to talk about, as I understand, one of the most important regulations that was approved in the last years. And I'm saying one of the most important regulation because this regulation passes a robust and clear signal of the global movement towards decarbonization and sustainability, marks a significant milestone in global efforts to protect forests, and as I see, sets a new era of environmental regulations globally. So I think we are starting a new moment in environmental regulations with the EU regulation on deforestation. So as we know, this regulation was approved on May 16 and aims to prevent products and commodities linked to deforestation and forest degradation from being placed in the EU markets. So let's start our panel. I don't want to extend further. So I'd like to welcome Rodrigo Pupo and Rodrigo Lima. So I'm going to call you Pupo and Lima to facilitate our communication. And I'll start with you, Rodrigo Pupo. Okay, so I'd like to invite you to provide us an overview of this regulation. We know that the regulation is out. There, it comes with already some parameters, you know, that some indications, but we understand there is a lot still to be defined, a lot of discussion under this regulation. So if you could bring to us, what is this?
I'm going to jump in here for a second. So if you could bring to us, just while we wait for Dulcie to get unfrozen, if you could bring to us an overview and then share with us what do you think we all should be knowing about this particular thing. So over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for Dulce, Proactiva, BCCC for the invitation, and good afternoon for everyone in Brazil, in Canada, and elsewhere. To give an overview, I will have a little help of a little presentation. So I will have here just 1 second presenting, sharing my screen. Just confirming with you if you can see, right?
Yeah, all good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so just the idea is to give an overview of the EU deforestation regulation and focusing pretty much on the impacts and challenges for foreign producers and exporters. As we can see here, the regulation was published in there was the approval in the Council and later on in the European Parliament, but it was actually published in the official journal of the European Union 2 weeks ago. So it's very timely that we discuss this regulation, and actually now we do have the specifics and the substantive obligations of the legislation. So it's much, I wouldn't say easier, but it's better for us to discuss the specifics rather than when we were discussing some time before, when we didn't have the perspective or the framework and the governance of the measure. So what actually this regulation imposes in terms of international trade? What changes will it bring? The most important requirement actually is a set of requirements that mandates that certain commodities, there is a list of commodities, certain commodities and derived products, before entering the EU market, they must comply with 3 main obligations. First, they must be deforestation free, meaning there is this a cutoff date of December 30th, 2020. So meaning that the products must not have been produced in a land that was subject to deforestation or forest degradation after this cutoff date of December 2020. It must also comply, these goods imported into the EU, they must comply with relevant legislation of the producing country. This requirement is somewhat broad, it is, but there is a guidance that it will include human rights, labor rights, and also rights of indigenous people, among others. So there is a lot of details still to be provided and guidance on the part of the European Commission. And also these imports, they need to be accompanied by a due diligence statement. But the important detail here is that the importer is the one that is obliged to provide this data, not this data, but this declaration upon each importation of this covered goods. So even though, of course, foreign producers and exporters, they have indirect obligations, the biggest burden is on the importer, because the importer is the one that is on the hotspot, that needs to inform whether the good is deforestation free, whether it complies with relevant local legislation, and also sign a statement saying that this that it has that the importer has and maintains a due diligence system to examine the risk of deforestation, which is basically the objective of this legislation. Here are three important aspects I'd like to also bring your attention. Is that the first one is that it covers both illegal and legal deforestation. So this is of particular importance to some countries. For example, Brazil, we have the forest the forest code, which foresees legal deforestation. So this is a sensitive issue as well, because some companies are acting legally in Brazil, but that will not work when they export their products to the European Union. Another important aspect of the legislation is that it provides it will classify countries in three different categories in terms of risk of deforestation, and which is called country benchmarking system. They will define, the European Commission will define within the next months whether countries are of low risk of deforestation, standard risk, which is the medium risk, or high risk of deforestation. They may have some carve-outs of parts and regions. There are a criteria that they will follow. Of course, they will have inputs from countries as well. There will be a dialogue according to European Union to discuss and to make this definition of where countries will be, in which category countries will be defined. And also another observation is that large importers, they will on an annual basis publicly report on their due diligence systems. So this brings a lot of publicity and also reputation aspects as well in terms of the impacts of the measure. So what are the products that are covered by this this regulation? Soybean, coffee, wood, pulp, wooden furniture, paper, bovine, and then meat, live animals, preparations, leather, rubber, palm oil. And also in palm oil, some organic chemicals and also miscellaneous chemicals are also included, which may bring some difficulty in terms of the supply chain as well. Cocoa and cocoa products, the entire chapter 18 of the harmonized system. So how do you find what products whether products are included? It's in Annex 1. You can see the exact tariff code for each and every product that is included, even the derived products. Then you can see in Annex 1 the combined nomenclature classification, which is the tariff classification coding of the European Union. And there you can see whether a specific product is included. But basically most of the products, the chapters involved in these products, they are already included. So just to give a more details, actually more of an overview of the due diligence system requirements. What will importers do in terms of maintaining and establishing a due diligence system? First, they will need to collect information. They will need to make a risk assessment. And also, depending on the result of this risk assessment, for example, if they see that if their analysis in the end lead to a conclusion of a non-negligible risk, they will also have another step, which is to have mitigation measures and actions to reduce the deforestation risk. Here we have said before about the country benchmarking system. So this is very important here, because countries that countries afforded or deemed of low risk, the importers of products originating from these countries, they will undergo a simplified due diligence. So it will be much easier for them to comply with the EU regulation, because they will only need to provide this collection of information and this initial stage of the information requirements. So they wouldn't need to go through the risk assessment because it is already low risk, so they don't need to go into the risk assessment stage, and of course neither on the risk mitigation stage. One also important aspects, we are giving an overview here, but it's important to note that among the information requested in this collection of information on the first stage is some more detailed information about the product, the description, the quantity, the country of origin, as well as the geolocation of the product. So and the production and date and time of production. So this is actually can bring a lot of this brings actually a lot of complexity to the due diligence. So here we can see also the difference between a low risk compared to a standard and high risk country. Also, the low, standard, and high risk also has an impact in terms of the sampling and the checking by the customs authorities, because there will be sample verifications and checking of in the customs clearance. So this may impact as well the burden on high risk countries compared to standard and low risk countries. Here, there's an overview of the timeline of the legislation. It is very important to know that the first review, the regulation foresees some reviews within the next years. The European Commission is still studying and adopting guidances and implementing regulations and secondary legislation to assist producers and importers. But up to June, the end of June of next year, the Commission will examine whether to include, in addition to forests, which is already covered by the regulation, it will decide whether to include other wooded lands. And here is important because other areas of interest and sensitive, for example, Cerrado region in Brazil may be classified, may be included here up to June of next year. Another important here milestone would be the country risk assignment. So the Commission by the end of next year. So this is very important from now on until the end of next year. The European Commission will be examining the data and the deforestation rates and among different sectors to come up and regions, details of regions and other specific areas within countries to determine the country risk up to the end of next year. So this is important for you to know, and also this is an important timing also for governments, for the Canadian government, for the Brazilian government, and Canadian and Brazilian companies to get involved and get prepared, but also to have this in mind that by the end of next year the European Commission will definitely define whether a country is high risk or low risk. And from now until then, all countries are of standard risk. So the way that the European Commission decided is to classify everyone as standard upfront, but within the next months they will up to next year, the end, they will classify these countries. And the main obligations for large and medium importers in the EU, they will start by the end of next year, actually in the first day of 2025. So then you have the main importers needing to with the obligation to provide their declaration of due diligence, which means that prior to that they have performed their due diligence and they have put in place their due diligence systems. And 6 months after that, then you have the main obligations being applied to the other importers in the EU. And here I would like to also, but not, it's the end, but just to finish, we raise more questions here than answers. The challenges we do have, and some of them are opportunities, some are a way of dealing with the next steps. First is a need for the private sector to get prepared, and the legislation is out. There is no way to change the legislation. The process, the drafting is no longer a possibility for governments to change the main obligations. So the private sector needs to react and needs to adapt. There will be a long way, but maybe productive, and also to defend and to make clear the methodologies, the technologies, and the systems that Brazilian and Canadian farmers they use to produce, and what can be considered also by the European Union. Again, this is not a registration within the European Union or with the European Commission, but rather this is something that needs to be agreed with the European Union, that certain methodologies or criteria, they will be accepted when and if and when examined and prepared by importers within the context of their due diligence system. So it's important that the European Union is aware of what is going on and what companies have already in place. It's important also to know the participation of small and medium enterprises and farmers in this process. And there is also the possibility of inclusion of new products and ecosystems as well. This is something to have in mind. And also the regulation foresees the possibility of including the financial sector as well within the scope of the regulation. So these were my main remarks, and I'm available for looking forward to the discussions.
Thank you, Pupo. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes.
I'm sorry, yeah, my internet was off for a couple of minutes. So thank you very much for this overview. And it is extremely interesting to know, as you said, I think we have already the obligation set, but a lot of details to be worked on, right? So Rodrigo Lima, I'd like to turn to you. So when you look at the list of commodities that Rodrigo brought to us, we see that we have the commodities, the grains, but we have also products that use these commodities as an input. So like chocolate for cocoa, and Rodrigo Pupo brought some examples for palm oil. So that brings a lot of complexity, right, in the implementation, because when you say soy is only soy, when you say palm oil, and you look at palm oil, but when you look to the industrialized products that come from that use these commodities as input, I think that brings a lot of challenges in the further challenges in the implementation of this regulation. So what I'd like you to address and share with us, Rodrigo, is how do you see the impact, of this regulation in the Canadian and Brazilian markets? What are the impacts for our commodities? Our saying Brazilian and Canadian commodities, Brazilian and Canadian products, and also looking at the global. When you look at the global dynamics of production, how do you see the impact of this regulation?
Thanks, Dulcie. Great to hear Rodrigo's presentation. and thanks BCCC for the invitation. The first thing, before jumping to your question, Lucy, the first thing I would highlight, it's one topic you brought at the introduction, is that this is not something that will pass in 5 years. We will not even think about due diligence requirements such as what the EU is proposing right now. This is something that came to become a common practice on international markets, considering deforestation and all of the social human rights labor agenda as well. So it's not just deforestation. And by that, I think it's very important to think, no, I don't have problems with deforestation, so my risk would be manageable and very low, so I'm okay. When we see at the regulation that directors from companies must be personally responsible for inaction and for importing products with risks, the directors of companies, and this is explicitly at the regulation, considering deforestation and considering all the human rights and social agenda. This is something big, right? So of course, the products that are at the scope at this time, and you bring the example of coffee and cocoa, for example, and chocolate made with cocoa and coffee, that in Brazil it's not a driver of deforestation, but maybe targeted as a possible high risk product depending on the region, and maybe be away from the market, because ultimately the importer will decide to import or not based on the risk. And Rodrigo mentioned the structure of the regulation. So I think acknowledging that this is a huge issue on the table, and we have the EU due diligence, we will have the UK and the US in a short period of time. And then I think we need to think this kind of regulations as new regulations being adopted by countries, considering the whole climate change agenda, the efforts towards the Paris Agreement and decarbonization and climate neutrality and so on. And I would put the CBAM regulation at the same basket, which I'm starting to call the carbon spaghetti bowl, because we have a lot of measures being considered and some already approved, such as this due diligence regulation that aims at climate goal. The main purpose of the regulation is to achieve a climate goal in terms of reducing emissions created because deforestation, and bringing together all the social agenda as well. So, and this passes a very important message to companies and stakeholders worldwide. There are some countries adopting regulations to tackle climate change and social issues. This will create new demands for who do trade and business, right? So companies will need to have new staff managing the EU regulation when it comes to deforestation, a different person to deal with all the social and human rights aspects. And what I see is that the private sector will try to adapt, as Rodrigo Pupo mentioned, because they want to do trade and to continue doing trade and not to face barriers to trade. So this adaptation, I think this is natural from a big change like that, including to the EU importers, right? That we need to learn and to manage different kinds of processes and documents and everything to reduce the risk. So what a due diligence system implies and requires at the end, we need to manage risk of deforestation, of social and human rights problems, and so on. And what does this mean in terms of being able to do trade? An importer that wants to import and the exporter that relies on several, the origination of products from several farmers, for example, in Brazil, of soybean or beef, for example. The meat packer exports, but the meat packer needs to manage and to control and to engage with several different ranchers that are sourcing cattle to become beef to then be exported. And this creates a set of different practices and all of these actions towards reducing risk. Because if I have a low risk, the importer will be comfortable to buy from me, and I will be able to export. One topic that for me it's important to think is that no matter how the companies will try to adapt, because they will want to continue to do trade, and then we will have the EU, the UK, and possible different regulations as well. So this is not just an EU topic, EU issue, EU subject, as I usually hear. This is a global topic. So one thing that I think it's extremely important is that beyond the practices and learning how to manage and to adapt and to do trade, considering complying with this regulation, is to look to what the obligations that I need to follow and the practices that I need to follow to have a low risk can support me as a company towards navigating these requirements in a better situation compared to you, for example. What improvements I can do along my company or along my relationship along a value chain to be able that will support me on higher standards, considering environmental and social issues. I think this is an important possible positive outcome that will emerge from all of this learning of how to implement and to manage the EU regulation right by now, but in a near term, and other regulations as well.
Thank you, Rodrigo Lima. So we are talking about the ESG agenda, right? That in the end of the day, it's risk management. So when you look at the ESG, we talk about risk. So if you know your risks, you address your risks, right? And you manage your risks. And in the end of the day, you have a regulation, but it's more focused, or it's on good practices, right? So I'd like to go back to the trade aspects that you mentioned, you know, and then ask Pupo. There's a lot of concerns. You have been following the concerns of the Brazilian government, you know, and with the regulation, with the EU regulation, and how producers are going to respond to this new regulation. And even some countries, some governments doing an active positioning, you know, against the regulation or trying to understand the regulation. So touching again on more on a legal perspective, how do you see that the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and its member countries are looking at this regulation, or are looking at the environmental regulations that are coming, how it's being discussed under the umbrella of the World Trade Organization? You are on mute,
Yeah.
yes.
don't know if Rodrigo wants to talk about the trade aspect, but I can get on the WTO as well. Brazil has been since the drafting of the legislative proposal, the first draft of the Commission last year, and throughout the discussion in the Parliament, the Brazilian government was already raising, together with other governments, in particular Indonesia. They have raised together or individually, they have raised concerns. I wouldn't say challenge, because there is no formal challenge, because there actually, this is not a dispute there, because there was no measure at all. The regulation was just published, but Brazil did raise concerns in the Committee of Agriculture, in the Committee of Trade and Environment, and in the Council, in the WTO, at the WTO Council of Trading Goods as well, which is a higher in terms of hierarchy, addressing concerns. And making its voice known by the European authorities. And of course, it would be preferable. I think everyone agrees that it would be preferable if the reason is environment, that the legislation would provide a better market access for deforestation-free products, rather than restricting or prohibiting market access. It, of course, in terms of, and that goes hand in hand of some of the positive measures that some countries do, really, to foster trade in environmental goods, and actually that's the discussion that is being held in terms of sustainable goods, green goods. All these trade policy, green trade policy agenda is to foster trade in sustainable goods. So of course the option would be, the better option with much less friction and trade friction would be to ease the market, and but again, that's that was not the way it was done, and Brazil has been closely monitoring this, and of course this is one of the not only for Brazil but Canada, for example. When you talk about soy, Brazil is the first provider of exporters of soy to the EU, more than $8 billion euros last year. But Canada was the 5th largest exporter of soy to the EU, more than $500 million euros. So that's very that's significant as well. So Brazil has raised these concerns, and there is, of course, as Rodrigo said, the lower the risk, it will be much easier for the importer to do business with countries and with products that would not, bring more burden and costs, because increased burdens means increased costs. So assuming that the product would go through, the traceability and all the steps, because we are assuming that countries would be able to meet the requirements, right? So and what about those that don't? So this is something to be thinking about as well.
Thank you, Pupo. We have a question here that say, what will the deforestation monitoring tools look like for different countries? And Rodrigo Lima touched a little bit on his speech so far on the difficulties or on the challenges that we have on bringing a standard or an aligned methodology that is going to support the implementation of this agenda. Right, this is we have many methodologies, best practices, and how this is always going to fit into what the EU is requesting or is going to assess. So I'd like to invite Rodrigo Lima to talk a little bit about this dynamic of methodologies and best practices and references that are being used to respond to the deforestation agenda?
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. This is a very good question because actually the regulation does not propose a methodology that must be followed. What the EU Commission brings is, what the regulation foresees is that the Commission will create, will define risk for key countries based on deforestation data and historic data available. And this would be a reference. And this will support regulators to manage and to consider what is being imported under the regulation and do all the monitoring and so on. But this is not a methodology. This is a tool that will be used to define risk and see this is a low risk area. I don't have much problem with this, and this will ultimately reduce the level of the monitoring that will be managed, that will be done at the border, right? And this creates a lot of possible opportunities, right? Because actually the importer needs to manage the risk. The reference by the Commission on areas of low or high risk, it's something very important. Okay, but then if I have a low risk area, and even with this status, I need to manage my risk as an importer, and I will do due diligence. I will require information, for example, when it comes to deforestation, about all the information about all the areas that are producing the soybean, the beef, the coffee, and so on. What type of information? The EU Commission cannot say this because every country has their regulations and instruments and so on. So it is interesting because there's a lot of talks about the EU regulation in terms of traceability, and everyone likes traceability because I need to feel comfortable with that what I am buying follows certain requirements, and traceability is the tool to assure me that type of information. Yeah, we know that traceability supports several different sectors to bring an information from here to here with a reliable process that will really assure the importer that he's buying something that follows different requirements. The challenge with tracing deforestation from here to here, and especially with commodities that I have a specific logistic, is that to have 60,000 or 80,000 vessels of soybean or soybean meal with information of thousands of farms that produce that 80,000 tons of soybean, that it's in a vessel that will go to Rotterdam. Imagine how many information I need to have on this side to allow a proper risk management of the deforestation risk here at the importer side. So actually the regulation is not creating a traceability system. The regulation is saying to the importer, you will need to assure using due diligence strategies and tools and so on, and I will define risk and how you will manage the deforestation risk, or even worse, all of the social and human rights agenda it's up to you. And how the importers will do this, it will probably rely on the level of assurance, aiming to really manage risk very properly, on a very positive way, and the cost of doing one option or the other. So, and in this regard, it's extremely important, and I'm always thinking about this and talking to people here in Brazil from the government and from the private sector, because Rodrigo mentioned the forest code implementation, because if that is a important environmental regulation in Brazil, and we have an environmental registry on a farm by farm basis, that will have this information on deforestation. If we have this, which we call CAR, the Rural Environmental Registry, if we have the CAR updated and validated by the environmental agencies, actually I am in Espírito Santo right now talking about this agenda today, we will have a possible tool that it's official, right? And passes on a positive information and a credible information regarding deforestation. How importers will say, okay, I agree with you, this is a good way forward, and give me this information that I can manage my risk, and I'm okay buying from you, Pupu. That's fine. Dulce, I don't agree with the type of information that Dulce is bringing me, because it doesn't allow me as an importer to manage my risk, and I am liable here, and I don't want to suffer a fine and all the impacts that can emerge from imports associated with deforestation. So and including, I think one possible thing that will happen is that some private the voluntary private schemes or certifications will probably be accepted by importers as a tool to address the risk. We saw this at the Renewable Energy Directive, that the EU created several sustainability requirements, and the importers that follow, for example, RSB or ISCC or Bonsucro and other certification schemes, can import having a very good assurance that all the sustainability requirements are being complied. So certifications might become a possible tool to do this traceability as well. The problem with certifications is that for commodities, this is not usual, right? For coffee it is, for cocoa it is, for pulp and paper it is, but for commodities, this is not very usual, because it implies a lot of costs.
Thank you, Lima. It's a short panel. It's a 1-hour panel with a lot of questions, right? It's such an interesting topic. But we have 10 minutes left. And I would like, Pupo, to ask you, in your presentation, you mentioned that EU is considering to bring some regulation or, regarding deforestation to the financial sector. So I think this is very relevant, because when you get to financing, right, or posing obligations on financing, that changes the game. So I'd like you to briefly explain to us a little bit more on how deforestation is landing on the financial sector. And then I think we have time for a final question.
Okay, well, Dulce, this is actually a very important question, because the Commission will examine until mid-2025, it's not a long time, whether financial institutions will be included within the scope. So if the financial institutions we also need to get involved in this due diligence system sphere within the context of the EU deforestation regulation. This is, of course, there will be a very, very important change to the legislation. However, this topic, the environmental sustainability, is already a reality in a vast majority of international players and financial institutions. So this is already in their agenda, ESG agenda. And but the problem, as Rodrigo was saying, is this carbon spaghetti bowl, as he said, is this regulatory fragmentation, because just like in the EU, also in the UK there is a possibility, because the UK does have the legislation in place but not regulated yet, so it's just waiting for secondary legislation for the legislation to be enforced. And there's also the possibility to include the financial sector as well. But again, different countries, they respond to in different ways in terms of public policy responses. They have different responses. It can take different forms. So it's very complicated, because Rodrigo also said about methodology. So there is no methodology for deforestation on the part of risk management. However, when you see the legislation concerning carbon border adjustment mechanism, the European Union is establishing methodologies for the calculation of embedded direct and indirect emissions embedded in the imported products. So it's very difficult. And again, the financial sector is also involved and trying to anticipate this. But how to anticipate if you have such a diverse scenario? So it's difficult. But again, this is the world that we're living in, and the financial sector needs to deal with that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Popo. So we have 5-6 minutes left. And we have been, well, when you see a regulation like this, we Brazilians, that we have the Amazon, the rainforest, we think, well, this is for Brazil, right? But I think we have, of course, many countries that are going to be affected by this regulation in different levels, as I understand. So we have been talking about challenges, impact, methodologies, how we are going to respond, and clarity, and a lot of the obscure side, let's say, of this regulation. I'd like you, Lima and Pupo, the final 5 minutes, so 2 minutes, 3 for each one, to help us to look at the opportunities of these regulations. For countries that are going to be affected or that are going to be impacted, what are the opportunities? Where is the opportunity for Brazil? Where is the opportunity for Canada? So let's look at the bright side of this regulation now.
Thanks, Lucy. If I may put an idea, is that it's challenging. There's all the concerns of impacts, but come on, a big part of the regulation regarding deforestation, assuming that most of deforestation in Brazil is illegal, what the EU wants, it's a proof that we follow our regulations, right? And so, come on, we don't have a document today that allows us to pass this information on forward. Come on, let's do this. Let's learn how to do this, and let's export products that are being produced without deforestation. There's all the debate about legal and illegal, I understand this, but let's learn how to do this, and to prove that we are producing without this impact. And in Brazil, we have conservation of native vegetation along with farms. So come on, I have a very good standards for what we call low carbon agriculture or climate smart agriculture if I am considering those aspects. And what about you? So let's make a lemonade, how we call here in Brazil, with the lemons we have, and not just say that the regulation must be forgotten and will not operate, because it will operate. It is starting to be managed, and we will have new regulations soon, including all the CBAMs, models and types that we will have. And then there's, okay, plenty of concerns, yes, but we need to try to understand how to reach and to make business on this scenario, because all the climate neutrality and the Paris Agreement is here, and business are totally connected to this, right? And wants to continue doing business.
Pupo?
Yes, I agree with Rodrigo, and very briefly, I think this is also an opportunity to join efforts in terms of monitoring tools. Someone asked about monitoring tools, so join efforts and in terms of science, in terms of information, exchange information, whatever best each country has as well, and also in terms of climate financing, right? Because there is a huge debate in terms of obligations, in terms of transparency, but I think it's all countries are already, they have the green subsidies, so there is also this possibility, and in terms of also in the Paris Agreement of climate financing, which will definitely help the more to get countries involved in the supply chain of these products.
Perfect. So I think we are coming to the end of our panel. We still have a few questions on our chat. So I don't know, Khalil, if you can help us taking notes of these questions, and if there is a way that we can answer these questions later on. Okay, so we'll be glad to do so. And for Mariana, that asked us about the timber regulation, European timber regulation, I'd like just to say that we are having another panel, I think it's next week, right, Khalil, next week, and we are going to talk about the challenges of implementation, of these regulations. So in practical ways, we are going to bring producers, associations of producers, to discuss what are the challenges of implementation. So I'd like to thank Rodrigo Pupo and Rodrigo Lima. Thank BCCC for this opportunity. I think it was a great discussion, and wish everybody a good afternoon.
Thanks so much to all.
So much for
all the best.
this
Muito obrigado por tudo.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded and will be available in the next few days on YouTube. And don't forget to register to our second session on the new EU Deforestation, where we will focus the challenges of implementation, like Dusa said. Thank you so much again. Thank you for accepting our invitation.